Today our workshop is on building healthy relationships. Go ahead, I'm ready for the next slide. Okay, so for some introductions, me and my coworker Jessica, a couple other of my coworkers are in this webinar as well, Rena and Gitanjali. We all work for an organization called SEWA. We're a nonprofit that works for Asian Indian family wellness. And today we're going to be focusing on obviously young people. This webinar is for people ages 16 through 24. But in general, our organization works with women that have suffered from domestic violence and sexual assault. We have a seniors program and also a nutrition program. And this is our first meeting for our youth program. So welcome. Our youth program is being supported by the Minnesota Department of Health. And today our meeting is going to look more of like half a webinar style and half, well, probably a little less than half, but towards the end, we're going to do more of like a discussion forum about things that you guys have questions about and just comments, questions, concerns in general. So yeah, I'm gonna let Jessica introduce herself really quick.
Sure. Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm a she, her, and I am a program coordinator and facilitator here at SEWA, and I focus on women's program and this new youth program. So hi, nice to meet everybody.
And then I'm a community advocate for SEWA, and I'm also a student at the U. I'm going to be a sophomore this upcoming year. So yeah, so some guidelines for this webinar. For the first half, we're going to be recording. So if you guys want to have your videos on, that's fine, but you guys will be muted for the first part. And please feel free to use the chat space if you guys have any comments or questions. You can private message me or Jessica, and then we will revisit at the end. Please be respectful and listen actively. This space today will be a little bit more like me talking at you, but going forward, this space is created for you. So your wishes are command if you have certain topics that you want to talk about, attachment styles, love languages, if you want to know more about allyship, how to support, affected communities, things like that, please let us know and we will make sure that we're targeting our stuff towards what you guys want. If you want to hear from mental health professionals, community leaders, people who've had personal experiences, we will do our best to make that happen as well. Going forward, if you would like to use a pseudonym, that's totally fine. I just ask that you email me or Jessica beforehand so we can make sure that we know who's coming in and out of the Zooms and everybody's privacy is being protected. Confidentiality is an expectation with this group. Stories of abuse, violence, just personal experiences in general are expected to remain confidential, and nobody from our staff, me, Jessica, if there's stuff happening in the Facebook page, Rena will be involved with that, and Gitanjali will also be involved with just like probably back planning this stuff. Nobody will report anything unless we feel like your life is in danger, and we will be very open with you about any reporting that is even being considered. And it's not like we'll just do it, like, of course we'll ask you. This is more of like, it's like we're all equal in this space. Like nobody's gonna be instructing you or telling you what to do.
Yeah, you'll always have power over your information. So
yeah, go ahead.
That's it. I just wanted to reiterate what you were saying is that
Gotcha.
even if there's a situation of abuse, we will always come to you and be like, is it okay if we move forward with anything? And then you will have control over the situation and be able to say yes or no before anything moves forward. So
Yeah. Next
you're
slide.
in, you are empowered here.
Okay, so a couple of things that we're going to be talking about today are different types of relationships. So, kind of the relationship spectrum from healthy to abusive relationships, some red flags that you should look out for, and more importantly, when you see the red flags, how do you support somebody and how do you be an ally to somebody that's going through a situation like that? Okay, so a couple of things that we're going to talk about. Um, is characteristics of starting with a healthy relationship. And though these things might seem obvious, I think it's really important to sometimes like explicitly identify them. Um, so just like generally communicating openly and actively listening, being respectful of each other's opinions. Like it's okay to disagree. You guys aren't going to be the same in everything. Um, a really, really important aspect is trust, which I know, of course, doesn't come easy to everybody, myself included. And but to get to the point of trusting what your partner is saying and not feeling like you need to prove yourself or your partner needs to prove themselves, is kind of like the ideal stage in a relationship. Being honest. And this being said, being honest comes with being able to maintain a sense of privacy and a sense of, you can still have other relationships and not tell every detail to your family members, your spouse, or, any type of relationship that you're in. It's okay to have kind of compartmentalized your thoughts in that sense. Um, Also, like a sense of equalness when you guys are making decisions with your friends, with your family, like everybody should be held to the same standard. Just because going to give us an example of that.
So a very basic example would be, let's say I'm texting a man and my partner is texting a girl. There should be equal respect towards each other's privacy in that. So he should not have to go into my phone to suspect I'm cheating. We should have an equal agreement there on um, I can have friendships with men and women, and he can have friendships with men and women as well. So
Yeah,
it's just having that equality on our own self and friendships and time.
yeah. And I think kind of going along with that is you can have um, like your personal time. If you are in a relationship, you can spend time with your partner, you can spend time with your friends, you can spend time with your family, and like it's okay for you to be apart from apart from each group of people for a certain amount of or for like an extent, not an extent period, a certain amount of time. And these needs are respected when they're happening. So if I'm in a relationship and I decide that I need to spend time with my family, that is something that should be respected on all of their fronts. Um, Moving forward, making mutual sexual choices, talking openly about sexual activities that you guys are participating in with your partners, and reproductive choices, defining what you are and what you aren't comfortable with. And I think a lot of that comes with open communication as well. When it comes to economic choices, every home situation looks different. Not everybody has two household incomes for their mom and dad. Not everybody has, like similar situations, but it's important that you and your partner or your um, family have equal say in regard to finances. Like everybody should have access to the resources that they need is the baseline expectation. And also engaging in supportive parenting, like all if you are in a situation like that, all partners are able to parent in the way that they feel comfortable with, and together evaluate the needs and wants of their children and of themselves as parents. Similarly, being a teenager, um, kind of as much as you can set up that foundation for supportive parenting. Communicate to your parents like what your wants and what your needs are. And even though it can be difficult to have those conversations to begin with, I think it gets easier as you keep addressing those needs. Go ahead. You can
Yep.
switch.
Oh, yes. There we go.
Perfect. So now we're going to be transitioning into talking about like unhealthier relationships. So just some like telltale signs are not communicating when problems arise. Like you either like aggressively fight in the moment, argue in the moment, or you don't discuss them at all. Um, and this is an aspect that it's so hard for a lot of people. I'm so bad with confrontation. I would run away from all my problems if I could just never address them. But realistically, like your relationships are not going to progress if you're not willing to have those difficult conversations with the people that you care about. Moving forward, like being disrespectful when you're not being considerate of your partner or your spouse. That's a telltale sign. Not trusting one another, like feeling the need to invade their privacy in order to establish like okay, like they're not cheating, or okay, they're not being like they're being dishonest in a sense. That's not very healthy. Also like being dishonest with your friends and your family and your relationships, it never leads to good things. Even though honesty can be really difficult sometimes, it's definitely what's going to get you through that relationship and maintain it. Trying to take control if someone feels like their desires and choices are more important when it comes to like family. There's a fine line, of course, like being South Asian kids, like our parent, like adulthood means nothing, like 18 means nothing. Like of course they still have a say in their life, but again, like communicating your needs and choices that you want to make as an adult, make sure you're putting that out there. um, Only spending time in one relationship, um, like for example, if you're in a relationship and their community is the only one that you're engaging in, their friends, their family, their social circles, um, it's important that you like keep your sense of self and your own relationships like in play as well. um, if you're being pressured into sexual activity, um, that's absolutely like not okay. That's unhealthy. If you like, that includes if somebody is guilting you into doing things that you're not comfortable with. Ignoring somebody's boundaries. It's assumed, like if it's assumed that only one person is responsible for making informed choices, that's not okay. Um, like an example of that would be, okay, if you're engaging in sexual activity, like you you expect, like you're expected to be tested, for example, for STDs, but you're not, your partner isn't willing to do that, like pay you the same respect. And then lastly, if you're unequal economically, finances, if they're like not being discussed and one person is just in charge, unless that's mutually agreed upon, that's also not, that's not healthy. So moving forward, some characteristics of a relationship that are abusive or hurtful communication. This comes to like threats, insults, like when somebody is referring to you in a demeaning way, mistreating the other person, like not respecting or having regard for like their feelings or thoughts or opinions. And then another like key sign that you see in abusive relationships, if someone is accusing the other of cheating or an affair unfoundedly, or like without regard. Like it's often used to um, like make excuses for physical or verbal like harm that a partner is making. So um, there's also a sense of denial that comes with abusive actions. So if somebody's trying to minimize your behavior, like, oh, I'm doing this because you're making me do this, like you're cheating, which is why I'm acting with X, Y, and Z reason. That's abusive. Controlling the others, there's no equality, like there's no regard for the other person's input, isolating the other partner from their friends, from their family. It's likely that you'll start to notice isolation as if like a cared one of yours is in this type of position. Um, Another thing or another abusive trait is forcing sexual activity or pregnancy. If somebody is um, not following the agreed upon like contraceptive that you guys are supposed to follow, or if there is like, for example, if there's like pregnancies one after the other, and it's not consensual, that's also a form of abuse. Exerting economic control when one partner controls all the money and all the resources and it's not an option. Um, Preventing a partner from like earning an income or not having access to their own income. For example, if two people are working and you have a mutual checking account and you're not able to um, have an equal amount of control on that money, that is a telltale sign. And engaging in manipulative parenting, like if someone is using their kids to gain power or control over the other partner, like bad mouthing or telling negative things to the kids about their partner, that is that's not okay. On the flip side, if you're if you find yourself in a family situation where you feel like your parents are um, kind of emotionally manipulating you to follow their decisions, that's also a sign of an abusive relationship. Okay, so some red flags that you should look out for. You never know if your loved ones or your care or people that you care about are in this situation. Some things that you can look for and make sure that you're supporting them through. Um, if their partner puts them down in public and they're like, oh, don't worry, like he's just being silly or she's just being silly, like it's often deeper than that. They're constantly worried about making their partner angry. Like if you guys are at a party and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to go, like I don't want to make him mad or I don't want to make her mad, like those are early signs of anxiety in people that is often caused by relationships. Making excuses for their partner's behavior, like, oh, they just had a bad day, this is not normal, they don't usually explode like that. Their partner is extremely jealous or possessive. Like if your partner is trying to exude control, like you can't go to your friend's house today, or you can't go home today because your sister's going to be there and she doesn't like me, or whatever the case is. They have unexplained marks or injuries. This is really sensitive because they're going to try to disregard them by saying like, oh, I just like tripped down the stairs. Oh, I ran into the door. But if you're seeing repeated patterns, that's definitely something that you should be aware of. Also, just a personality change. They will most likely start to exhibit signs of depression or anxiety. And like on the rare occasion, if they come out and they're like not talking, or if they're not engaging in the family calls like they used to, or if they are anxious in social situations, those are key signs that you should look for. Go ahead, Jessica, next slide. So a couple different types of abuse that you guys should be aware of is, first of all, the most obvious, physical abuse. um, hair pulling, punching, slapping, kicking, biting, choking, like forbidding you from like basic things like eating or sleeping, um, preventing you from calling the police or seeking medical attention that you need, driving recklessly when you're in a car with them, things along those lines. Another aspect that you should be specifically more aware of is like forcing people to use drugs or alcohol, especially when there's been a substance abuse problem. This is often a way to like create dependence in a relationship. Moving on in like verbally and emotionally abusive relationships, it's going to look more like name calling, insults, criticism, lack of trust, like snooping, invading privacy, like monitoring where you go. And I know with technology these days, like Snap Maps and Find My Friends, like there's a really fine line, but when you start to feel uncomfortable by it, that's a good sign, or that's a good way for you to kind of distinguish, where you're at. Um, Also, if they're threatening you, blaming you, um, gaslighting you, that's yeah, it's another way of emotional or verbal abuse. Moving on to like sexually abusive um, methods of retaining power, like forcing you to dress in a certain way that you don't want, forcing you to um, engage in sexual activities that you haven't consented to. It's important to remember that consent can be revoked at any time. Just because someone is saying yes, they could say no 35 seconds later, and that's the answer. And it doesn't mean that um, you can just account for their consent that they gave you earlier. Another thing Jessica mentioned, which I thought was really helpful, was just because you're in a relationship does not mean that you're forever consenting to whatever they want to do. It's still important to get explicit consent before you're engaging in sexual activity. Um, I think a lot of times something that's undermined is sexual coercion. Um, if you're being pressured into doing something, if you're being pressured into giving consent, then that's not consent. It should be something that you are both willing and wanting to engage in. Um, if they're making you feel like you owe them, or if they're engaging in like drugs and alcohol to loosen up your instincts and make you more prone to saying yes, that's unhealthy. um, Playing off the fact, what I said earlier, like playing off the fact that you're in a relationship, reacting negatively when you say no. I think a big element is respect there. If they respect you, then they should also be respecting your choices. Um, and lastly, I think in a college setting, this is probably the most prevalent. Trying to normalize their sexual expectations, being like, oh, like everybody does it. Like, why are you being like calling you names? Like, why are you being a prude? Like, that's not acceptable. Moving on to reproductive coercion. Um, this is when I know the college community isn't as impacted by this, but like once you're a little bit older, refusing to comply with the method of birth control that you're agreeing upon, forcing you to not use your birth control, forcing you to um, like withhold, or they're forcing you by withholding finances that needed to purchase birth control methods, monitoring your menstrual cycles, things like that, where you're not comfortable, but you're being put in a situation where pregnancy is inevitable. Jessica is going to talk a little bit about financial and economic abuse.
So with this one, it can be complicated because we can find ourselves in a lot of different type of financial situations. So a couple of examples is giving an allowance to your partner and watching closely how they spend it. Um, and then like demanding the receipts. So there's a lot of control and power in that, and it's not healthy to have that type of power over somebody. Um, Another example is stealing money. That's incredibly dishonest and disrespectful, and good way to counteract that is just having that open conversation. Um, Maxing out credit cards, using funds from savings accounts and things like that. And then I think probably the biggest one may be having them have, like, for example, if I was working, my partner would force me to put my paycheck into their account. That's probably the most abusive in terms of economic abuse.
Yeah. Um, and then lastly, we're going to talk about digital abuse, which obviously, like, our generation is probably the most familiar with, like negatively insulting someone on Facebook or Instagram, like sending them disrespectful messages via like DMs, email, um, telling somebody who they can and can't be friends with on Facebook, like me telling, for example, like me telling my partner, you can't follow any females other than me. Like, obviously, that's not a reasonable expectation for me to have. If they're using your social media to keep constant tabs on you, that's a telltale sign of lack of trust. Pressuring you to send explicit videos, sending you explicit pictures or videos, and then demanding that you send them in return. Stealing or insisting on your passwords. These days, a lot of people's life is on social media, and so giving them passwords could lead to dangerous results. Constantly texting you or feeling like you can't be separated for a period of time, and then followed by fear of like being punished if you're out of the house for too long. And then just reminding that you never deserve to be mistreated online or offline. Boundaries are really, really important, and you shouldn't be pressured or forced into doing anything that you are not comfortable with. That includes pictures, that includes social media. A good thing to know is your privacy settings. If you find yourself slipping into that situation, make sure you're exploring privacy settings on Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook. I know Facebook has been upping their privacy game, so make use of that. Go ahead, you can switch to the next slide. Now that we've addressed all the issues that are prevalent, we're gonna talk about some tips that you can follow to prevent yourself from falling into that cycle. So first we'll talk about communication. Something that I found really helpful is like finding the right time to confront an issue that you've been like meaning to talk about. It's easier to talk about something that's difficult in itself, is like find a time when they're not preferably going to be thinking about a bajillion other things or stressed about work or stressed about like extraneous circumstances. Talking face to face is so helpful. I'm sure you guys have experienced misinterpretation over text, over email. So talking in person can minimize those misunderstandings. As hard as the communication might be, and like your feelings are completely valid, it's important to not attack the person that you're communicating with. So going back to like the things that we learned, even like in elementary school, using I statements, like I feel sad that we don't talk during the day anymore, instead of being like, you don't talk to me anymore. It can really impact the way someone is interpreting and processing the information that you're telling them. It may not even be intentional. Um, and then, as hard as it is, be honest about your feelings and the issues that you guys might be having in your relationships. Um, it's the only way you can solve them. Like, your partner is not going to read your mind, and neither is your family, and neither are your friends. Um, and then Jessica is going to talk about the 48-hour rule, kind of playing off that.
Yeah. So the 48-hour rule is like a practice of self-reflection, kind of. And the way you do this is like, let's say you get into a fight with your partner and they make you mad and upset. And um, when that happens, there's a chemical release in your brain of the fight or flight. And it's important to recognize this because rational thought is very difficult when your mind is defensive. So the best way to combat that is to wait about 48 hours. And within that 48 hours, writing down how you're feeling, but also reflecting on why am I feeling this way? Am I angry? And am I upset? What happened during this time frame? And if you're still upset about whatever happened, whatever was said after 48 hours, then you should have a conversation with whoever has upset you because that's how you heal and that's how you make a better and healthy relationship.
Yeah. Moving on to like trust building. Um, Trust looks different for everybody. So you have to kind of ask yourself questions like, how do I build mutual trust in a relationship? What does that look like for me? What do I need from the other person? Are you guys like there for each other um, in good times and bad, like physically, emotionally? And then something that builds trust for me personally is like being consistent. Are you, if someone is reaching out to you, are you consistently there for them rather than when it's just convenient? Um, and are you meaning what you say and doing what you're saying as well? So if you are um, experiencing a relationship where somebody says that they love you, but they're physically abusing you, as hard as it is to accept that abuse does not equal love. And once you admit that to yourself, I think that's when the healing process kind of starts. Moving on to like equality. Um, when you guys are arguing, are both sides heard in the argument? Are both of you willing to negotiate and compromise respectfully while like keeping into account other people's boundaries? Do you guys feel comfortable with the financial balance in the relationship? Um, if you have, if you choose to have kids together, do you and your partner have equal weight in like parenting decisions? And do you feel, most important is, do you feel respected and safe by and with your partner? Um, I think respect is like just like the foundation. If that's there, then I think you can kind of work through hurdles that you face. Um, Something that we talked a little bit about earlier is just consent. Consent needs to happen every time. Explicitly ask, is this okay? Like, make sure that you guys are on the same page and don't assume. Um, like being in a relationship doesn't mean consent is automatic. It doesn't matter if you're in a relationship. It doesn't matter if you're hooking up with them. It doesn't matter if you're married. Consent shouldn't ever be posed as an obligation. And also, yeah, just reiterating that it needs to happen every single time. Um, so talking about like healthy conflict resolutions, I think Jessica's going to do that, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. So something to consider when with conflict resolution in healthy relationships, whether it's a verbal disagreement or an argument. Um, these things will happen in every relationship, even healthy relationships. Disagreements happen. And just because there's a disagreement doesn't mean it's not healthy. It's how we address those that makes it healthy or not healthy. So the first thing is to set boundaries. Um, and so with that, everybody deserves to be treated with respect, even during an argument. Even when people are upset, there should always be respect and it should never result in any type of abuse. If your partner curses at you or calls you names or ridicules you, you can let them know that that behavior is not okay. And if they don't stop, you can walk away and tell them we need to continue this discussion later. And that's when you can exercise that 48-hour break to really think about the consequences and everything. Um, the next thing is finding the real issue. Typically, arguments happen when one partner needs or wants are not being met. Sometimes they're not good at recognizing this themselves. So it takes a lot of communication and effort to try to figure it out. Um, but to get to the heart of the matter, if your partner seems really needy, maybe they just feel insecure and need your encouragement. If you're angry and your partner isn't taking out the trash, maybe you're really upset because you feel like you do all of the work in the house. And that's why it's so important to learn to talk about the real issues before avoiding it. Because a simple conversation of being like, I've done the dishes for the last 6 months. Can you please take out the trash? Could could help solve that issue. Um,
Yeah.
and then another option is agree to disagree. Um, a lot of we are not the same people. A lot of the times, what makes up our being is different from each individual. So, if you and your partner or roommate or parents can't resolve an issue, sometimes it is best just to drop it, um, because we don't have to agree on everything, and we have to focus on what matters. If the issue is too important for you to drop and you can't agree to disagree, then there just may be a compatibility issue. And this can happen in friendships, in roommates. This is part of life and figuring it out. And I think it's important to be kind to yourself as you figure it out and kind to other people as they figure it out as well.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing is compromise when possible. Compromise is a major part of conflict resolution in any successful relationship. It's not always easy, um, but striving to find that middle ground can really allow both of you to feel satisfied in the outcome. But that goes back to knowing whether it's one of those make or break situations as well. Um, Next is considering everything, which is kind of a loaded statement because it's almost impossible to consider everything, but it's important to consider the important things, and that changes from each individual. Um, so some questions to ask yourself is this issue really important? For example, is it really a huge issue that he's not taking out the trash every day? Maybe every other day is a better option there. Does it change how the two of you feel about each other? Are you compromising on your beliefs and morals? If yes, if it's important to you and it makes you feel comfortable standing up for how you believe, if not, then it's time to compromise. Or it's a compatibility issue. So it's just thinking about the greater picture on how you want your life to be. Um, and then finally, conflict in unhealthy relationships. Although conflict is very normal, your arguments should never turn into personal attacks and should never become physical. If you can't express yourself without the fear of retaliation from your partner, you may be experiencing abuse. And to learn more about that um, and how to draw the line between what it is, remember one sign of abuse in relationships is a partner who tries to take control and manipulate you. For example, if your partner gets upset because you occasionally go out with friends or have like a group texting with all of your friends, um, they check, they don't like you checking your phone, or they themselves check your phone. Um, and whenever you leave the house, they accuse you of cheating or doing something that you are not doing. So there's the conflict resolutions.
So moving on to, if you do find yourself or a loved one or somebody that you care about in an abusive situation, like how do you go about it? How do you be an active ally to them? Um, First of all, it's really, 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 really important that you can't rescue them. Like, you can't save them. It's really hard to see somebody that you care about get hurt, but ultimately, the only thing that you can do is support them in whatever decision that they're making. Help them find a way to be safe. Remember that abuse isn't about abuse is about power and control, and the most important way that you can help somebody get out of an abusive relationship is to empower them to make their own decision, and show your unconditional support for whatever decision that they're choosing, whether that's to stay in the relationship or leave. um, be non-judgmental. When somebody's in an abusive relationship, there's often um, a deep sense of dependence that they feel with their partners or with whoever they're in the relationship with. Um, so it's likely that they'll leave and they'll go back multiple times. And you have to, though it might be frustrating, you have to, again, show your unconditional support. Don't criticize them, don't guilt them. Um, if they end that relationship, continue to be supportive to them after. It's likely that they're grieving the structure that their life had. They're grieving the relationship that they just lost, though it might not have been the healthiest. And it's important to connect them with people who can provide them help and guidance, community leaders, um, like organizations like SEWA. There's so many domestic violence resource centers across the state that can help you with safety planning. We will be sending you a follow-up email. So there will be an outline in there on how to create a safety plan. And remember, like, even though it's really, really hard to see somebody you care about get hurt, ultimately, you have to support their decision, and their end goal is just to be safe and peaceful. Go ahead, you can change the slide. So having the conversation, just some tips to help you kind of structure the conversation is acknowledge that they're in a very difficult and scary position. Be supportive, listen. Not everybody wants advice. Sometimes people just need to say out loud the experiences that they've had. Remind them that the abuse is not their fault. Let them know that you're available to help whenever they may need. And remember that what they need most is somebody that's going to listen and believe them. So try to fill that role as much as you can. Okay. So thank you so much for listening to our presentation and webinar. Now we're going to stop the recording and go into like a couple of discussion questions.